Have you ever realized some forgotten meals were a part of you all along? In the 60s through the 80s, these dishes filled kitchens with scents and flavors that quietly shaped everyday life. What else have we let fade without noticing? Polynesian meatballs brought tropical flair to living rooms across the country. Made with ground beef and breadcrumbs, the meatballs were bathed in a glossy, sweet and sour sauce of pineapple juice, brown sugar, vinegar, and soy sauce. Toss in green bell peppers and chunks of canned pineapple, and you had yourself a party in every bite. It was inspired by the Tiki craze that swept through American dining culture in the 60s and 70s. Suddenly, everyone wanted their dinner to feel like a vacation. Polynesian meatballs made that dream a reality. Served over rice or skewered with toothpicks, they were equal parts appetizer and main dish, loved by kids and cocktail drinkers alike. The sauce stuck to your fingers. The pineapple added a tangy zing. The meatballs soaked up all the flavor like little sponges of paradise. It was joy disguised as food. But when the Tiki trend fizzled, so did dishes like this. Sweet sauces fell out of favor. Meatballs went back to marinara. But if you have ever had one bite of that sticky, fruity, beefy goodness, you know. This was not just food. It was escape. A bite-sized passport to the islands, even if you never left your dining room. Hasselback potatoes were something that we got from Sweden thanks to a renowned Swedish chef, Leif Ellison, who invented the dish. And the name of the potatoes comes from the fact that Ellison worked at the Hasselbacken restaurant. These started coming to America as interests in foreign cuisines and dishes grew more and more. People wanted to see what the hype was around these new kinds of potatoes, and they were also just really eager to try Swedish and Scandinavian cuisine. In terms of texture, you would expect the potato to be a bit thinner, but it was easier to crisp up. The best thing about these kinds of potatoes is that they were incredibly good at absorbing the flavor from sauces, butter, seasonings, and more. Plus, they worked with a lot more things than potatoes did, and that's saying something. I doubt there's anything under the sun you couldn't make with potatoes, really. Hasselback potatoes were something that raised the reputation of a potato from a humble ingredient to a sophisticated side dish worth having at any Sunday roast. And if you ever find the chance to have one of these, you'd get why too. Few flavors are as tied to Valentine's Day as red velvet. It's rich, decadent, and undeniably festive. But its origins go back much further than most people realize. During the early 20th century, cocoa powder was sometimes processed with vinegar to enhance color and texture, creating cakes with a naturally reddish hue. By the 1950s, food coloring took over, turning red velvet into a visual showstopper, perfect for romantic occasions. And what happens when you combine red velvet's signature flavor with another classic, cheesecake? You get a dessert that's as indulgent as it is nostalgic. Swirling tangy cream cheese into fudgy brownies, balanced sweetness with a touch of sophistication. Recipes like this became popular in mid-century cookbooks, offering a dessert that felt elegant without requiring the skill of a pastry chef. But as the years went on, dessert trends shifted. By the 2000s, red velvet had gone mainstream, showing up in everything from cupcakes to lattes. Its once special charm got lost in the wave of mass production. And with bakeries offering quick, ready-made options, the art of homemade Valentine's treats started fading. Still, few desserts feel as festive or as shareable. Because if love is all about balance, what better symbol than a brownie that's both rich and tangy? Roasted capon with sage butter is a bit of a shocker. Basically, it's a castrated rooster that was raised purely for slaughter. This used to be a centerpiece dish for everything related to Sunday roast dinner, festivals, celebrations, and more. But slowly over time, this kind of stuff really went out of fashion. The rooster has to be castrated at a young age, and the reason they do this is because then they don't really produce testosterone anymore. As a result, the bird tends to grow larger, with a bigger fat content and more tender meat. Capons became a symbol of luxury exactly because of these qualities. They were seen as a superior bird with a lot of richness. There was also the fact that the overall taste just wasn't that gamey, which honestly made it fit so many people's palates. This entire practice of caponizing a rooster is something that first started in ancient Rome, and there are even agricultural texts that describe the process. From there, it found its way to Europe, and naturally, they eventually brought it over to us. You can expect a buttery flavor and a very, very crispy skin and tender inside, but thanks to industrial poultry farming and changing tastes, even these outstanding qualities couldn't keep it in the game forever. Scalloped ham and potatoes, a classic dish that brings together two of the most beloved comfort foods, tender ham and creamy, cheesy potatoes. This casserole has been a staple at family gatherings and Sunday dinners for generations, proving that simple ingredients can create something extraordinary. The dish's origins can be traced back to the mid-19th century, where scalloped potatoes, sliced potatoes baked in a rich, creamy sauce, became a popular sign. The addition of ham likely came later, as cooks sought to stretch their budget by incorporating leftover meats. The result was a filling, satisfying dish that combined the savory goodness of ham with the comforting texture of potatoes. Scalloped ham and potatoes became even more popular in the 20th century when convenience foods like canned soups and processed cheese made their way into American kitchens. The creamy sauce, often made from a blend of milk, butter, and cheese, is what binds the layers of ham and potatoes, creating a hearty casserole that's easy to make but feels like a special meal. Scalloped ham and potatoes is the ultimate use-it-all dish, because who doesn't love a meal where everything gets smothered in cheese? It's a dish that's perfect for feeding a crowd and always leaves everyone asking for seconds. Chocolate mayonnaise cake was the quiet genius of hard times, the kind of recipe that sounded like a mistake until you tasted it. Born from the scarcity of eggs and butter during the Great Depression and World War II, it replaced both with a spoonful of mayonnaise, transforming a pantry accident into moist perfection. It was rich, humble, and made with what you had. On Memorial Day, it appeared on fold-out tables covered in checkered cloth, topped with whatever frosting was available or nothing at all. Kids did not know the difference. Adults did not care. It was chocolate cake, and it was delicious. Over time, it became a symbol of kitchen ingenuity, how American cooks could turn rations into rituals. But these days, even with full shelves and every ingredient imaginable, we ignore it. Maybe it seems too odd, too poor, too honest. But here's a thought. What if the best recipes are the ones that remind us how lucky we are not to need them? Zucchini boats with tangy tomato glaze were the 70s answer to eating healthy without feeling punished. You sliced zucchinis in half, scooped out the insides, and filled them with a seasoned mix of breadcrumbs, ground meat, onions, and whatever spices the pantry allowed. Then came the tomato glaze, a sharp, sweet-sour coating made with ketchup, vinegar, and a hint of sugar that dripped over the stuffed boats like sauce on a meatloaf. The zucchini stayed firm. But healthy trends changed, and zucchini boats were left behind in the shuffle. Replaced by kale chips and smoothie bowls, they disappeared quietly from dinner tables. Still, when the summer gardens bloom and the zucchinis come in fast and heavy, someone remembers. Someone reaches for the old recipe card with the tomato-stained corner. And when the boats come out of the oven, you remember too, how the 70s tried to lighten up and for a brief moment actually did. Bologna cake was absurd, shameless, and completely unforgettable. Stacked slices of Bologna slathered with seasoned cream cheese, then frosted into a meatloaf-shaped spectacle and garnished with olives. It was not a joke. It was serious party food. A hit at potlucks, and yes, Memorial Day gatherings. People laughed at it, but they ate every slice. Because Bologna was cheap, cream cheese was satisfying, and this strange cake made people talk. In a time before Instagram, before aesthetic mattered more than flavor, Bologna cake proved that food was meant to bring people together, sometimes by surprise. Now, it is a punchline. But maybe that says more about us than it does about the food. When did we start caring more about judgment than joy? Molded chicken salad ring was elegance trapped in gelatin. Take cooked chicken, chopped celery, pimentos, and a splash of mayonnaise. Mix it with unflavored gelatin and chicken broth. Pour into a ring mold. Chill, unmold. Garnish with deviled eggs and maybe a sprig of parsley if you were feeling fancy. Molded salads were big in the 70s. They were a way to make leftovers feel like luxury. A way to transform chicken scraps into something presentable, something worth talking about. Of course, tastes changed. The gelatin revolution collapsed. Cold chicken became chicken salad again, and the molds went back into storage. But there is something haunting about the precision of it, the care, the pride in making dinner not just edible, but sculptural. Molded chicken salad ring was never just about flavor, it was about effort. And that, in its own jiggly way, is kind of beautiful. I'll tell you what was a premium cut of meat, though. Roasted saddle of venison with red currant jelly. Saddle of venison might not be a term you're familiar with, but it basically means an incredibly premium cut of deer meat. This was the loin of the deer, and it had the tenderloins as well as both sides of the backstrap still left to the bone. This was a cut that came from between the ribs of the animal, so it was an incredibly tender piece of meat. The meat was lean, with a bit of a gamey flavor but an overall perfect texture. It really was the kind of thing you'd stop and stare at in a market, looking at your wallet with hesitation a few seconds after as ideas flood your mind. Now you might be wondering what a star-studded dish like this has to do with red currant jelly, and why on earth anyone thought that would be a good combination. In most cases, I'd agree with you. Jelly has no business being on top of meat, but in this case, it really did work. The natural gaminess of the meat was balanced out by the red currant jelly, and most restaurants always served them side by side. It also really upped the presentation, thanks to the glossy look of the jelly, which just went perfect with the deep brown you'd see on the venison. All in all, this dish was the kind of plate that would steal your eyes, heart, and more as soon as you sat down for what would be one of your most memorable culinary experiences. For centuries, knots have symbolized love and commitment. In medieval Europe, young couples exchanged knotted cords as a sign of devotion. Some historians even trace the phrase "tying the knot" back to these traditions. So it's no surprise that home bakers once embraced the symbolism, crafting soft pretzels into love knots for Valentine's Day. Pretzels themselves have an old-world charm, dating back to monks in the 7th century who shaped dough to resemble folded arms in prayer. But by the 20th century, they had taken on a sweeter side. Home cooks dipped them in cinnamon sugar, drizzled them with honey, or, in true Valentine's spirit, served them with warm chocolate for a romantic touch. The contrast of salty and sweet made them an unexpected but perfect addition to the holiday table. So why did this charming tradition fade? Simplicity took over. The rise of store-bought chocolates and prepackaged sweets meant fewer people were willing to knead, twist, and bake homemade dough. And in a world where Valentine's treats became all about visual appeal, pretzels, no matter how lovingly shaped, couldn't compete with glossy heart-shaped confections. But for those who appreciate the beauty of handcrafted traditions, Love Knot pretzels prove that some of the best Valentine's treats don't come in a box. They're made by hand, one twist at a time. Yes, stuffed pigeons with chestnuts were something that people actually did regularly reserve for their tables for Sunday roasts. And yes, this is definitely gluttony. Not bordering on the edge, not a stone's throw away, just pure, unadulterated gluttony. Stuffed pigeons were a traditional dish that were brought onto American kitchens primarily through immigrant communities. By this I mean, you can once again curse the British for their food. I really don't get what goes on in the kitchens in that country. It feels like every step they take is like playing Russian roulette because will they take a step forward? Will they set us back a decade or two? You may never know. Anyway, the chestnut thing was actually something that was brought into the equation thanks to the French. Apparently, chestnuts are a pretty popular stuffing in the region there. It makes sense that we tried things like this since in the middle half of the 20th century, all we ever did was delve as deep as possible into European cooking. Thing is, this dish was only possible because people regularly kept pigeons and raised them on their farms and in their living spaces. Thanks to the mass amount of urbanization, your typical two-bed in New York just doesn't come equipped with pigeon-raising facilities these days. Salmon patties, a classic dish found in many American homes, offer a tasty and affordable way to enjoy fish. Often made with canned salmon, these patties are mixed with breadcrumbs, onions, and seasonings, then fried to golden perfection. The dish has roots in the 1940s, when canned fish became a popular pantry staple due to its long shelf life and affordability during tough economic times. Despite being simple, salmon patties are packed with protein, omega-3 fatty acids, and heart-healthy nutrients, making them both a tasty and nutritious choice. The secret to a great salmon patty lies in its texture, crispy on the outside, yet tender and flaky on the inside. Often paired with a generous helping of creamed peas, this dish takes on a comforting, homey feel. Creamed peas are made by cooking fresh or frozen peas in a creamy sauce, sometimes enhanced with butter, milk, and a touch of seasoning. The creamy, mild flavor of the peas balances the richness of the salmon patties, creating a perfectly matched duo. Salmon patties with creamed peas are the kind of comfort food that makes you think, "Why did I ever stop eating this?" It's an easy, satisfying meal that stood the test of time, offering comfort with every bite. Welsh rarebit sounded like a fairy tale, but it was really just toast, cheese, and pride. A sauce of sharp cheddar, butter, mustard, and dark beer poured hot over toasted bread, it came to American tables through British roots and Depression-era pragmatism. On Memorial Day, it was humble enough to serve in a backyard and special enough to feel like a treat. It was filling, satisfying, warm in all the ways a dish should be. You ate it with a fork and a napkin and a bit of awe that melted cheese could taste so refined. Once it graced cookbooks and cafeterias alike. Today, you might find it only in crossword puzzles or retro pubs trying to be clever. But it was never meant to be ironic. It was meant to make you feel full and fortunate. Somewhere in the middle of our rise to gourmet food culture, we stopped pouring cheese on toast and calling it dinner. Was that really an upgrade or just an erasure? Macaroni loaf was cold, solid, and weirdly wonderful. Imagine a chilled slice of pasta, yes, pasta, bound with gelatin and studded with chopped ham, olives, pimentos, and whatever cheese you had lying around. Served in tidy cross-section slices, it was the potluck darling of the 70s. You did not serve it warm. That was the point. Macaroni loaf was built for summer gatherings, refrigerator trays, and situations where you needed something that looked impressive but cost about $3 to make. It was not trying to be Italian. It was trying to be innovative, and for a while it was. People praised its portability, its stability, its strange sense of class. It was a dish that knew its place and did not ask for more. Then pasta stopped showing up in gelatin, and people decided they liked their noodles hot and saucy again. The macaroni loaf faded into memory, quiet, dignified, and just a little bit slippery. But if you ever see one at a family reunion or on a table covered in plastic wrap and paper doilies, give it a second look. It may not be glamorous, but it is proof that for one brief moment, America thought cold, jelly pasta was the future. So, roasted quail with grapes was what you get for the missus on a special night on the town, or maybe it would be the 14th of February and you wanted to make an impression. Maybe the occasion was severely special, or maybe you just had a lot more money than you knew what to do with and you were bored. The thing that remains consistent in all cases is that you always needed to look like you came from money if you were having this dish. You may not really think too much of it, at least I know I didn't for the longest while, but there are even financial barriers to trying certain kinds of dishes. That couldn't be more true for quail, which has always been a luxury order both in the current day and in the past. It's just not something you get for cheap, and when you add on sweet roasted grapes to the platter, then you only increase the ambiance of the dish that much more. I like to affectionately refer to it as mansion food because, well, it just looks like what you'd find in a mansion. Ironically enough, it was actually something you'd have found on the tables of most upper-class families back then, so it's not like only the uber elite got to taste some quail. You just definitely had to be well off. Quail isn't as inaccessible as it used to be, but it's definitely not really a hotly demanded item anymore either, outside of gourmet dining circles. Savory pastries have always been a mark of refined entertaining. While desserts often dominate Valentine's Day, elegant appetizers once played just as important a role. In the mid-20th century, small, handcrafted tarts filled with rich, tangy cheeses were a staple at romantic dinners and cocktail parties alike. They were a way to start a meal with sophistication, bite-sized, decadent, and just enough to whet the appetite. Goat cheese, with its creamy texture and slight tang, was a natural choice. Though commonly associated with French cuisine, it gained popularity in the US during the 1960s, as Americans developed a taste for more artisanal dairy products. Pink peppercorns, often mistaken for true pepper, added a floral heat, while honey balanced the sharpness. The result was a tart that was bold, delicate, and undeniably gourmet. So why aren't these little bites still a Valentine staple? One reason is shifting food trends. By the late 20th century, cheese boards replaced carefully crafted cheese tarts, offering the same flavor profile with less effort. At the same time, home entertaining changed. Fewer people were making intricate appetizers from scratch. Spiced honey-glazed ham was a special one. It was one of the first few instances we had of spicy glazes or glazes in general being used in popular mainstream American traditions. Something breaking into the platform of Sunday roasts, potlucks, casserole Mondays, and church potlucks was always a big thing. It was basically the 20th century equivalent of someone getting a contract with the NBA right out of high school or landing a Tarantino production. It was your big break, your way to get your name out there in the industry. Dishes like these were some of the first things in the world that ever popularized honey glazes, which were really just a European concept for the most part until they became as big as they are now in America. Also, people just got tired of having the same old ham they were always used to. You need to switch things up, man. Keep it interesting. Take yourself out to a dinner you really like, and ham just isn't it. I mean, for breakfast, comfort food days, and intense cravings, I'm right there with you. But there's no sense in sticking to tradition so much you ignore the good ideas out there, right? Would you say you're the type to experiment? And if so, are glazes something you'd play around with? Turkey and gravy, traditionally a centerpiece of Thanksgiving but often enjoyed beyond the holiday season, holds a special place in American culinary history. Its pairing with mashed turnips, though less common today, harkens back to a time when root vegetables were staples in kitchens for their affordability and long storage life. Turkey has been an American icon since colonial days. Benjamin Franklin famously praised the bird, calling it a much more respectable bird than the bald eagle. While roasting turkey might be associated with grand feasts, smaller versions, like turkey breasts, frequently appeared on mid-century dinner tables, making the meal more practical for everyday cooking. The star of the plate, next to the turkey, is the gravy. Made from the drippings left in the pan, it's rich, savory, and ties everything together. A good gravy, as some would say, can salvage even a dry turkey. Often overshadowed by mashed potatoes, turnips were a go-to side dish in earlier generations. Packed with nutrients and a slightly peppery flavor, they offered a lighter, unique alternative to spuds. Mashed with butter, cream, or even a touch of maple syrup, they brought earthy warmth to the plate. If turkey is the headliner, gravy is the conductor. And turnips? They're the backup singers you never knew you needed. A harmonious meal indeed. Ham salad was once the sandwich spread of resilience, a creamy pink memory scooped between slices of white bread or spooned onto Ritz crackers. Leftover ham was ground or chopped fine, then mixed with mayonnaise, relish, mustard, and maybe a little onion. Tangy, salty, with a whisper of sweetness. It was the taste of post-holiday thrift, of making sure nothing went to waste. On Memorial Day, it fed whole backyards of aunts, uncles, and cousins gathered under the sun with paper plates and plastic forks. It was simple, yes, but it was good, and it reminded everyone of what they had, because you only made ham salad when you had ham. Today, it has disappeared, edged out by deli platters and packaged dips, lost in the cold shine of supermarket convenience. But it is not just the ham salad we miss. It is the careful chopping, the quiet assembling, the joy of making something old into something worth sharing again. When did we decide our memories were too humble to taste again? tomato aspic with vegetable was not just food, it was a dare. A jiggly, ruby-red ring made from tomato juice and unflavored gelatin, packed with canned mixed vegetables that barely knew what season they were in. It sat proudly on buffet tables, trembling in the spotlight like a crowned jewel from another planet. The flavor was tangy, savory, and oddly refreshing. It was meant to be elegant, a sort of salad meets art installation. It was unapologetically weird. And then, one day, it vanished. People stopped putting vegetables in gelatin. They stopped calling it salad. But those who remember it can still hear the soft schloop as it slid out of its mold onto a plate. And they remember how, even with all its oddness, it somehow brought everyone to the table. Maybe not to devour it, but at least to ask, what on earth is that? Roasted capon with sage butter is a bit of a shocker. Basically, it's a castrated rooster that was raised purely for slaughter. This used to be a centerpiece dish for everything related to Sunday roast dinner, festivals, celebrations, and more. But slowly over time, this kind of stuff really went out of fashion. The rooster has to be castrated at a young age, and the reason they do this is because then they don't really produce testosterone anymore. As a result, the bird tends to grow larger, with a bigger fat content and more tender meat. Capons became a symbol of luxury exactly because of these qualities. They were seen as a superior bird with a lot of richness. There was also the fact that the overall taste just wasn't that gamey, which honestly made it fit so many people's palates. This entire practice of caponizing a rooster is something that first started in ancient Rome, and there are even agricultural texts that describe the process. From there, it found its way to Europe, and naturally, they eventually brought it over to us. You can expect a buttery flavor and a very, very crispy skin and tender inside, but thanks to industrial poultry farming and changing tastes, even these outstanding qualities couldn't keep it in the game forever. Light, airy, and effortlessly elegant, fruit-based creams have been a fixture of European desserts for centuries. The fool, a simple combination of crushed fruit and whipped cream, dates back to 16th century England, where it was traditionally made with gooseberries. Over time, variations emerged, with strawberries becoming a popular choice, especially for Valentine's Day, when their vibrant red color and natural sweetness made them a symbol of romance. By the mid-20th century, American home cooks embraced this no-bake dessert as a sophisticated alternative to heavier puddings and cakes. A spoonful offered the perfect contrast: luscious whipped cream, bright strawberries, and the delicate crunch of toasted almonds. It was indulgence without excess, a dessert meant to be savored rather than devoured. But as convenience foods took over, simple classics like this fell out of favor. Instant pudding, canned whipped topping, and pre-made pastries made from scratch desserts seemed like more effort than they were worth. And with the rise of ultra-decadent Valentine's treats, think lava cakes and chocolate truffles, lighter desserts struggled to compete. Still, few things capture romance like a dessert that's both simple and sophisticated. Have you ever been around for Passover or Rosh Hashanah? If you're Jewish, you know what I'm talking about right from the get-go. If you're not, for some cultural context, the next item on our list, stuffed breast of veal, is actually something that you see a lot of in Ashkenazi Jewish cuisine. It was something that Jewish immigrants started to bring on over to America as well, sometime during the 19th and 20th centuries. Veal was actually on the opposite end of the spectrum in this time period too. People actually didn't consider it luxurious at all, and it would even be something that was really affordable for the working class. Loads of European immigrants also eventually came along, and the whole stuffing aspect was something they imparted onto the dish. You'll see a lot of that in America. You get a dish from one corner of the world, and it ends up going through 5 different makeovers because, well, what don't we have here, culturally speaking? It's just one big melting pot, which makes it hard for things to stay in the public's eye for too long. Tamale pie is an American dish that brings together the heartiness of ground beef, the comfort of a cornmeal topping, and a blend of savory seasonings that make it a family favorite. While the name might suggest a traditional tamale, Tamale pie is actually a casserole that layers these ingredients for a meal that's both satisfying and easy to make. The dish likely has its roots in the Southwest, where tamales have been a staple in Mexican cuisine for centuries. However, tamale pie emerged in the United States in the mid-20th century as a more accessible version, taking the flavors of tamales and turning them into a bake. Ground beef is browned with onions, garlic, and chili powder, then topped with a cornmeal batter and baked until golden. The result is a savory pie with a cornmeal crust that mimics the texture of a tamale. Tamale pie quickly became a favorite for home cooks thanks to its simplicity and versatility. It could be customized with ingredients like cheese, olives, or even jalapenos to suit personal tastes. Some families served it with a side of cornbread or a dollop of sour cream for extra richness. Tamale pie is proof that you don't need a fancy tamale press to make a meal that's full of flavor. Simple, hearty, and always a crowd pleaser. Lemon icebox pie was more than dessert. It was a reward, a sigh of relief on a hot day when everything else was melting. With just lemon juice, condensed milk, and a graham cracker crust, it was a marvel of minimalism. Chilled to perfection in the icebox, what we now call the refrigerator, it was smooth, tart, creamy, and cool. The kind of dessert that did not need frosting or fanfare to win the room. It was a fixture at Southern Memorial Day tables where the air was thick and the people were grateful. This pie was summer. But as we grew more obsessed with spectacle, lava cakes, mirror glazes, 12-step pastries, we stopped reaching for simplicity. Lemon icebox pie does not trend. It does not wow. It just works. Maybe that is why we lost it. In chasing better, we forgot what was already enough. Do we remember how good it felt to open the fridge and find a little cold joy waiting? TV dinner-inspired Salisbury steak bake was nostalgia baked into a Pyrex dish. It had all the elements of the classic tray meal, beef patties, gravy, mashed potatoes, but it was homemade, heartier, and proudly oversized. The steak was shaped from seasoned ground beef, seared for texture, and smothered in rich brown gravy. Mashed potatoes were piped along the side, maybe with some peas or corn tucked in for color. And if you were feeling fancy, you carved faux grill marks into the patties with a butter knife. It was performance, not just dinner. Families who could not afford constant takeout or had grown up on frozen meals found comfort in making their own version of the television tray fantasy. It was a weekday luxury, a weekend staple. One dish, one oven, one nod to the atomic-age dream of eating well without effort. Eventually, people moved on. Microwave dinners improved. Taste buds demanded bolder flavors. But this homemade Salisbury steak dish stood for something, a belief that even when food came from humble ingredients, it could still feel iconic. And when you serve a plate that looks like something you saw on television in 1975, it does more than feed you. It transports you. Herb-stuffed guinea hens were another kind of meat that had an extremely fascinating history overall in America. They were something that was cherished by the population for how sustainable they were and the specific flavor of the meat, which would just work the best overall with roasting. It was a blend of African and rural American traditions that brought the best out of this dish. See, when I say African influences, I don't want to discredit the amount of work they actually put in here. Guinea hens were something that were always native to Africa, and when prisoners were brought on over thanks to the transatlantic slave trade, they brought on over along with them all of their cooking expertise. To them, guinea hens were a deep-rooted connection to their heritage. Can't say I blame them either. It's pretty human to find pieces of your home wherever you go, isn't it? Speaking of homes, lots of households actually dedicated themselves to farming and raised guinea hens. Now, besides the taste palette of America just changing a lot in the past few years, guinea hens have also not been the most popular farm animal in the past years, with more people investing in cattle thanks to beef production and how profitable that industry is. Thank you, McDonald's. Fine dining wasn't always reserved for restaurant reservations. Decades ago, ambitious home cooks brought luxury to their own tables, and nothing symbolized extravagance quite like lobster. Once considered a working-class food, lobster transformed into a high-end delicacy by the early 20th century. By the 1950s, lobster thermidor was a showpiece for special occasions, especially Valentine's Day. The combination of tender lobster, rich bechamel sauce, Dijon mustard, and a golden cheese crust made it an opulent centerpiece for two. But as indulgent as it was, this dish didn't survive the decades unscathed. The reason was its complexity, and lobster thermidor isn't a quick fix. It demands precise timing, multiple cooking steps, and an appreciation for the art of sauce making. Not exactly a weeknight meal. Then there's the price tag. Lobster wasn't always the luxury item we know today, but overfishing and demand turned it into one. By the 1980s, home cooks were trading in labor-intensive seafood dishes for more accessible proteins. And let's be honest, cracking shells and carefully stuffing lobster halves isn't quite as convenient as ordering a steak. Still, for those willing to put in the effort, lobster thermidor remains one of the most decadent ways to celebrate love. Braised lamb shanks with mint sauce are also something that have a particularly long history in America, and this time, it's with an Irish spin. Now, before we talk about what inspired this, let's talk a bit about the shank in general. This fine cut of meat has always been underappreciated since it came from the lower leg of the animal and was a lot tougher. It was something the wealthy class looked down upon because it was a dish you had to work for. You know, kind of like crabs. The more tender and soft meat was, the easier it was to eat, the more it would be associated with wealth. Lamb was also something that was really common in the 20th century throughout places like New England, where a farming culture really thrived. This rustic dish was a big part of the nose-to-tail style of eating, where families would devour every part of an animal in the name of not wasting a single bit of it. Personally, I think that's pretty considerate and respectful. How do you feel about it, though? While you type it out, let me tell you a bit more about braised lamb shanks. They fell out of fashion because, in general, people just didn't appreciate the gamey taste of lamb too much as time went on, but they were considered a big Sunday roast staple for people who were born in homes with farming-oriented lifestyles. Pork chops with scalloped potatoes was a duo so perfectly matched, it's as if they were destined to share the same plate. This meal became a dinnertime favorite for its balance of simplicity and satisfaction. Tender, pan-seared pork chops alongside creamy, cheesy potatoes. It's no wonder it earned its spot in the hearts and stomachs of families everywhere. The secret to scalloped potatoes lies in their layers. Thinly sliced potatoes are smothered in a rich, velvety sauce made from milk or cream, often with a touch of cheese, and baked until golden and bubbling. The dish likely evolved from French gratin dauphinois, but American cooks put their own spin on it by using cheese more liberally. Pork chops, on the other hand, have always been a practical choice for home cooks. Affordable and quick to prepare, they pair perfectly with the creamy potatoes, creating a meal that's hearty yet approachable. To many, the crispy edges of the potatoes and the seared crust on the pork chops were the best part. This meal is like a warm hug in casserole form. The only downside is that it's impossible to stop at just one serving. And really, who would want to? Boiled peanuts were once the unofficial anthem of Southern summer. A slow snack, a salty ritual. Green peanuts, soft and raw, were tossed into heavily salted water and left to simmer for hours, sometimes days. The result? Something that was not quite nut, not quite bean, but entirely addictive. On Memorial Day, they were sold from roadside stands in mason jars, passed down picnic lines, or offered in humble bowls under oak trees. The texture, soft, earthy, oddly satisfying, turned strangers into friends. It was not just about the peanuts, it was about the patience, the waiting, the knowing that you could not rush flavor or time or healing. That mattered. Today, we move too fast to let anything soak. Our snacks crunch. Our food is engineered for speed. The idea of simmering something for 12 hours just to eat it on a blanket in the sun feels absurd. But it was never about convenience. It was about connection. What else have we stopped boiling, just because it takes too long to remember who we are? Big Foo. Young patty sandwiches were born from leftovers and a little late-night brilliance. After a takeout dinner of egg foo young, those thick, savory Chinese-American omelets packed with bean sprouts and scallions, you would find yourself staring at a cold patty the next day, wondering what to do with it. Then came the solution. Slap it between 2 slices of soft white bread, smear on a little soy sauce-infused mayo, and suddenly you had a sandwich that was way better than it had any right to be. The sandwich had that balance: salty, rich, chewy, with just a little tang. In the 70s, it was a quiet favorite, especially in cities where Chinese-American cuisine had become part of the weekly rhythm. Today, it barely gets a mention. But those who know, they remember the comfort. They remember the fridge door swinging open, the sound of a knife scraping mayo from the jar, and the small, perfect silence that followed the first bite. If you think of a cut of lamb, I think one of the last places your head goes to is the leg. Yet this dish, a spiced leg of lamb with anchovies and garlic, attempted to traverse horizons that we had never really explored as a people before. Leg of lamb? Okay. Bold. With garlic? Fair. Have to keep it familiar if you want the masses to try it. Anchovies? This is starting to get a bit unorthodox. The idea here was to balance each of the ingredients' flavors with each other, creating one singular flavor identity that screamed umami. It actually did work too. For the spice rub, people would typically experiment with their own different variations, but things that would typically work well with anchovies and garlic like parsley, thyme, chili flakes, and more were used. The idea was to supplement the flavors that were already there, instead of introducing new ones that didn't exactly have a place. Whoever was making this dish, or wherever it originated from, they definitely knew how to stick to the big picture instead of getting carried away. The leg of the lamb was also slow cooked, so it would tenderize, something that only became easier as time went on and slow cookers came along. But by then, recipes that took time, work, and skill were already lost as people favored fast food deliveries and takeout for their Sunday comfort food. Homemade pasta has always been a labor of love. Before store-bought options became the norm, rolling, stuffing, and shaping dough by hand was a sign of care and dedication, especially for a romantic meal. Italian cuisine has long embraced ravioli as a special occasion dish, but one variation that once graced Valentine's tables added an unexpected twist: roasted beets. Beets have a long history as a love food. In ancient times, they were believed to boost attraction, and in Victorian England, they were even used to send secret messages between admirers. Their deep red color made them a natural fit for Valentine's Day, while their earthy sweetness paired beautifully with creamy ricotta. Finished with brown butter, a simple yet luxurious sauce, this dish balanced richness with a subtle, nutty depth. So why don't we see this stunning pasta as often today? Time and convenience played a role. Making fresh ravioli from scratch takes patience, and as pre-made pasta became more accessible, fewer home cooks were willing to go through the effort. At the same time, beet-based dishes fell out of fashion, replaced by more mainstream flavors. Swiss steak, a dish that's neither Swiss nor a steak, but somehow it has become a classic on American dinner tables. The name Swiss refers to the technique of Swissing, a process of tenderizing tougher cuts of beef like round steak by pounding or rolling it out. The result is a melt-in-your-mouth meal that feels far fancier than its humble beginnings. This dish gained popularity in mid-century America, when home cooks needed to stretch their budgets. By slow-cooking tenderized beef in a rich tomato-based sauce, the flavors could develop while turning inexpensive cuts into something extraordinary. Onions were essential, adding sweetness and depth to the tangy tomatoes. The result was a savory, satisfying dish perfect for ladling over mashed potatoes, rice, or even buttered noodles. Tomatoes, a key player in Swiss steak, were a practical choice. Canned tomatoes, first popularized in the early 1900s, made this dish accessible year-round. Who can resist the sight of those onions caramelizing in the skillet before being smothered in sauce? One could say Swiss steak is the Cinderella story of the food world. It starts tough, a little rough around the edges, but with a little care and time, it transforms into something utterly irresistible. Proof that sometimes slow and steady wins the race. Hot dog and bean casserole never pretended to be fancy. And that was its magic. Sliced hot dogs, baked beans, diced onions, sometimes a dash of brown sugar or mustard, all stirred together and baked until bubbling and browned. It was hearty, it was sweet, it was smoky, and it was cheap. This casserole showed up at Memorial Day when times were tight and no one blinked twice. Kids loved it. Parents appreciated that it fed everyone without a fuss. It was the definition of practical joy. Topped with cheese if you had some, served in the same dish it was baked in, eaten with a spoon and a smile. Today, it is almost gone. Too lowbrow, too old school, too tied to struggle. But maybe we need that kind of struggle again, not to suffer, but to remember the beauty in making a meal stretch, in making something satisfying with so little. When did we stop honoring the meals that held us together when little else could? Sweet and sour franks were party food for people who wanted joy on a toothpick. Tiny cocktail sausages, often cut into halves, simmered in a pot of grape jelly and yellow mustard. Yes, grape jelly. The result was a glossy, tangy, sticky glaze that somehow turned those humble franks into irresistible bites of bliss. You served them from a crock-pot, steaming and fragrant, with colored toothpicks and little paper napkins. The combination of sweet jelly and sharp mustard made them addictive. They hit every corner of the tongue, and they were shockingly easy to make. You did not need training. You just needed a can, a jar, and some heat. Then came the diet years, the fear of sugar, the war on preservatives. Sweet and sour franks were banished to the land of remember when. But let us not forget, these were not just appetizers. They were tiny time machines. Each one a sticky little memory of carefree gatherings, plastic cups, and music in the background. Sometimes a meatball is not enough. I really did mean it when I said that a lot of old-school American kitchens were rustic and simple. Ham-wrapped roast beef might not be the most inspiring or sophisticated plate of food, but it was something that was deeply, deeply comforting to eat. Some meals hold a special place in your heart because of their raw ability to lift up your day. This was one of those dishes. Roast beef has always been something that's been historically served in American Sunday roast dinner tradition. But the idea to wrap it with ham was something that was a new spin. It was new, but it was familiar enough. And I think that's why people flocked to this dish for as long as they did. The idea was that the smokiness of the ham would counteract the flavors of the roast beef, which was actually true in execution as well. It was a wonderful pairing that really highlighted America's knack for finding out wonderful ways to put a new spin on the same classic cuts of beef. For centuries, fruit-based desserts were considered the height of sophistication. Long before sugar was widely available, natural sweetness came from ripe fruit, often enhanced with honey, wine, or aromatic spices. By the 19th century, poached pears had become a staple of European fine dining, delicate, fragrant, and effortlessly elegant. Amaretto, with its deep almond notes, brought an added layer of warmth and complexity. Originating in Italy, this liqueur has been tied to romance for generations, with legends tracing its origins to a secret love affair in the Renaissance. Paired with silky whipped mascarpone, it transformed a simple pear into a luxurious Valentine's treat, one that felt indulgent without being overly heavy. So why did this dessert fade from home kitchens? Blame the rise of instant gratification. Poaching requires patience, simmering fruit slowly until it reaches the perfect tenderness. But as desserts became more about convenience and visual spectacle, delicate flavors like this were pushed aside for richer, bolder alternatives. Chocolate, with its immediate appeal, dominated Valentine's menus, while fruit-based dishes became more of a rarity. Yorkshire pudding stuffed chicken is a really imaginative dish. It's something that takes roasted chicken together with Yorkshire pudding, and while that really might be breaking too much away from tradition for some people, it's also a testament to how much of British cuisine America's really imported. Like it or not, I think we have a knack for European food if history is anyone to listen to. The idea to combine Yorkshire pudding with roasted chicken was something that worked out because of boredom. People wanted a twist on the typical British Sunday roast, and the pudding would typically be served on the side. This time around, it was used as a stuffing. The batter would soak up the juice entirely, and this enhanced the flavor of the meat and gave the pudding a new flavor entirely. It worked because of this flavor fusion, and despite how it's taken a bit of a backseat in recent times thanks to all kinds of new avenues available to people when it comes to fusion food, this variant of Yorkshire pudding and roasted chicken was definitely a really fun Sunday roast meal. This creamy, savory casserole, ham tetrazzini with egg noodles, showcases how a few simple ingredients can be transformed into something truly special. While turkey tetrazzini is more commonly known, ham tetrazzini became a popular variation, especially for using up leftover holiday ham in a way that felt both indulgent and comforting. Named after Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, this dish originally featured chicken or turkey, often paired with a creamy sauce, mushrooms, and a variety of seasonings. The exact origin of ham tetrazzini is unclear, but the combination of a rich, buttery sauce and tender ham makes it a favorite for families seeking a hearty, filling meal. Egg noodles, thanks to their soft texture and ability to absorb sauces, are the perfect base for this casserole. When tossed with the ham and creamy sauce, they turn into a flavorful foundation that holds everything together. A sprinkle of Parmesan cheese on top before baking creates a golden, bubbly crust that takes the dish to another level. Shrimp cocktail. Once whispered luxury at a time when luxury was rare. A cold ring of pink shrimp circling a glass goblet of spicy red cocktail sauce, it looked like something pulled from the future. Yet this appetizer had a place at the Memorial Day table long before it appeared in steakhouse menus. In the 1950s and 1960s, when people dressed up for dinner and starched their picnic linens, shrimp cocktail felt like a celebration. It was chilled, elegant, and just exotic enough to feel thrilling. And yes, shrimp was expensive, but that was part of the ritual. You saved for it, you shared it, you made the most of it. Now, it is a sad afterthought in plastic deli trays or an overpriced starter in restaurants. What we lost was not just shrimp. It was the feeling of occasion, of taking a simple seafood and elevating it with ceremony. Do we even know what it means anymore to earn our luxury? Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were chaos you could hold in your hands. Thick slices of white bread slathered with creamy peanut butter, then layered with hot, crispy strips of bacon. Sometimes it was grilled, sometimes eaten cold. Either way, it made no sense, and perfect sense all at once. The sweetness of the peanut butter, the smoky crunch of the bacon, together, they created a flavor so wrong it was right. Kids loved it because it felt like breaking the rules. Adults loved it because it kept everyone quiet for 10 minutes. In the 70s, this was an after-school classic, the kind of snack that came out when leftovers were gone and creativity took over. Eventually, food got cleaner, more curated. Bacon became artisanal. Peanut butter went natural. And this sandwich disappeared into whispered memories of weird cravings and childhood indulgence. But sometimes, you remember it. And in that moment, you know the truth. Flavor never cared about logic. It just wanted to be remembered. Roast guinea fowl with figs was a bit more refined than goat. It was something for a sophisticated palate, and the idea here was to really show off guinea fowl as a dish that could be more than just an association with the word rustic. It was delicate, and contrary to what you might be expecting here, the taste of the fowl wasn't overly gamey. It was masked by the richness and earthiness of the figs, and the pairing became something historical, making appearances in cookbooks, newsletters, and women's magazines. Early American kitchens were really simple and rustic, but towards the middle half of the 20th century, they started going more and more towards refined, presentable dishes that were smaller, more compact, and more densely packed with flavor. You might have less bites overall, but the quality was going to go up. The idea to pair fowl up with figs was something that we got from the Mediterranean, actually, and a bit of French cuisine on the side. It was a pretty neat idea to balance out the flavor of the game bird with figs, and this was later adopted in the South more than anywhere else since people ate guinea fowl so regularly for their Sunday roasts. Decades ago, a romantic meal wasn't complete without an elegant appetizer to set the tone, and in the world of sophisticated starters, shrimp cocktail reigned supreme. By the 1960s, this dish wasn't just an option. It was an expectation at fine dining establishments and home dinner parties alike. But some home cooks took it a step further, giving the classic seafood starter a festive twist by marinating the shrimp in pink champagne. It wasn't just for show, there was a logic to it. The natural sweetness of shrimp pairs beautifully with the crisp acidity of champagne, while citrus added a bright, refreshing contrast. It was light, luxurious, and, most importantly, effortlessly chic. So why did this bubbly seafood creation disappear? Simplicity became its downfall. By the 1980s, appetizers were getting more elaborate, and the subtle elegance of marinated shrimp started losing ground to fried, stuffed, and heavily sauced alternatives. Plus, champagne, once reserved for special occasions, became more of an everyday indulgence, making its presence in recipes feel less novel. Still, there's something undeniably romantic about a dish that combines elegance with ease. Some traditions die super hard, though. Braised oxtail roast and oxtail in general is something you probably never will be able to separate from the African American community here at any point in time. Hey, it's not like other people don't enjoy it, but if you want your oxtail done right, authentic and exploding with flavor, you best go to a black mom. You might be wondering where the roots of all this stem from. Well, besides just how oxtail was given to slaves because it wasn't as desirable of a cut of meat as others, African American cuisine often takes on a lot of influence from West African culinary traditions too. Lots of dishes like egusi stew, for example, also feature bone-in cuts of meat. Braised oxtail roasts, on the other hand, were a stew that was just really hard to beat. After emancipation, most African American communities started to rely on oxtail a lot, and braised oxtail roasts became a key part of Sunday roast culture for a lot of families. It's still probably the most prevalent thing on the list today, at least for now. Fish sticks, those crispy, golden-breaded delights, have been a fixture of American family dinners since the mid-20th century. While their origins date back to the early 1950s, when commercial frozen food production boomed, fish sticks quickly became a go-to for busy families. Made from white fish, typically cod or pollock, these little rectangular pieces of seafood are battered and deep-fried to perfection, making them as crunchy on the outside as they are tender on the inside. The classic pairing of fish sticks with tartar sauce elevates the meal. Tartar sauce, a tangy combination of mayonnaise, pickles, and lemon juice, adds a creamy contrast to the crispy fish. While the sauce has its roots in French cuisine, it became a beloved accompaniment to fish and chips, and later to fish sticks in the US. On the side, coleslaw, a salad made from finely shredded raw cabbage, carrots, and a tangy dressing, has been a popular addition to fish dishes for generations. Its crisp texture and slightly sweet flavor balance out the richness of the fish and tartar sauce. Peanut butter bars were the quiet heroes of community potlucks, school bake sales, and Memorial Day cookouts across the country. No baking required. Just graham cracker crumbs, powdered sugar, a lot of peanut butter, and a thin layer of melted chocolate on top. Press it into a pan, chill, slice. Done. And yet, it tasted like effort. Like someone cared enough to bring something sweet that would not melt in the sun or fall apart on a paper plate. These bars were packed in tin lunchboxes and Tupperware. They were simple and filling, just like everything else was supposed to be. Today, they have vanished, replaced by cookie dough dip, protein bites, and pre-cut grocery store bars. But what we lost in flavor, we also lost in intention. These were never about impressing. They were about showing up. Can dessert still be a gesture when no one makes it from scratch? Deviled ham logs were spicy little bricks of indulgence, dressed up for the cocktail hour, but made with whatever you had in your pantry. Take a can of Underwood deviled ham, mash it with cream cheese, Worcestershire sauce, and chopped pimento. Roll it into a log, coat the outside in parsley or crushed nuts, serve it with Ritz crackers, and watch it vanish before anyone asked what was in it. It was salty, creamy, with just enough heat to feel cheeky. In the 70s, it was the belle of the bridge club. No gathering felt complete without it. The combination of canned meat and dairy might sound suspect today, but back then it was considered resourceful and stylish. And if you ever find yourself holding a butter knife and a box of crackers at the edge of a family potluck, do yourself a favor. Make the log. Whole roasted rutabagas were a hearty dish. It was actually interesting to see a simple, rustic, and humble root vegetable like a rutabagas being transformed into a sophisticated dish with depth and several flavors. If you've never heard of rutabagas, think of like a hybrid between a cabbage and a turnip. They have thick skin, a really earthy flavor, nutty undertones, and they have yellow-looking flesh. The magic happens when you start to roast them, though. That caramelized exterior and the nutty but sweet interior is a work of art, and honestly, the perfect thing to readjust your palate with after a heavy and explosive Sunday roast. Again, these were vegetables that people got into more during the Depression because of how they could be stored for months and were also pretty affordable in comparison. Root vegetables in general were an area of food that Americanas never explored too strongly, but all of that changed with the 30s. Thanks to that, though, lots of tastes were acquired, culinary horizons were expanded, and we set the stage for an America that could have an appetite for a much more diverse and interesting menu. Sweet and savory combinations have long been a hallmark of special occasion cooking. In early American kitchens, pairing fruit with meat was tradition. From cranberry glazed poultry to apple-stuffed pork, the balance of rich and tangy flavors was a sign of culinary refinement. By the mid-20th century, cherry-based sauces became a popular way to elevate pork, adding a touch of elegance to home-cooked meals. Cherries, often associated with indulgence, have had a long history in romantic cuisine. In ancient Rome, they symbolized Venus, the goddess of love. Balsamic vinegar, with its deep, complex flavor, has roots in Italian culinary tradition dating back nearly 1,000 years. Together, they created a glaze that was both luxurious and surprisingly simple to make. So why did this dish fade from the Valentine's Day menu? Blame changing tastes and convenience. By the late 20th century, home cooks were gravitating toward quicker, less labor-intensive meals. Glazes and reductions required patience, and with the rise of pre-marinated meats, the art of balancing flavors from scratch started disappearing. No dish says Sunday dinner like a pot roast simmering away, filling the house with the unmistakable aroma of comfort. Pot roast was an event, the centerpiece of countless family gatherings. Originating in France, pot au feu inspired what we now call pot roast, combining tougher cuts of beef with slow cooking to create something tender and flavorful. In America, the pot roast became a household favorite thanks to its practicality. Chuck roast, brisket, or round, these cuts weren't fancy, but with the magic of a Dutch oven or slow cooker, they transformed into melt-in-your-mouth perfection. Carrots, potatoes, and onions balanced the rich beef with earthy sweetness and hearty texture. The beauty of pot roast is its patience. It doesn't demand attention, just time. It's a dish that rewards you for slowing down, a rarity in today's grab-and-go world. As one home cook joked, it's the only dish that cooks itself while you're watching Sunday football. And we shall not forget the gravy, a pot roast's crowning glory. Thickened with pan drippings, it's the glue that holds this masterpiece together. If love had a flavor, pot roast might just be it. If you've missed even one of these forgotten meals, you're officially nostalgic. Comment your favorite, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.